You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Inside the Screenwriter's Mind, episode number 2. If you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that. Stephen King.
Have you ever wondered what it's like inside a screenwriter's mind? In this podcast, we explore how successful screenwriters tackle structure, plot, character, dialogue, and the film business. Get ready to go down the rabbit hole of story. Let's travel inside the screenwriter's mind with your guide, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of Inside the Screenwriter's Mind. I am your guide, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is brought to you by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by 3 categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. And guys, I have a special treat for you. If you are interested in getting a 3-part video series on screenwriting and how to write blockbusters in Hollywood today by some Oscar winners, some multi-billion-dollar screenwriters, all you got to do is head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/free video series. Now, in today's show, we go inside the mind of Alex Dinelaris, who is the co-writer of the Oscar-winning film and screenplay Birdman. Now, today's conversation is brought to you by the Indie Film Academy podcast with Jason Buff. And Jason happened to get Alex right after he won the Oscar for Birdman. So that kind of gives you a good mindset of where this interview is coming from. He's still very excited from winning his Oscar, and he also goes deep into his craft, what it was like working on Birdman, and how he structures his stories. And it is a deep dive inside the mind of this screenwriter. So enjoy going down the rabbit hole of story with Alex Dinelaris.
So have things kind of gone back to normal, or is it still kind of crazy?
I guess as normal as things are right now, because it just so happens, things in every facet of this business take about 2 years to happen. And it just so happens that everything happened at the same time. So I have, as soon as the awards were over, we came back on Monday. The next morning, actually, we barely even slept. We went from the last party of the night, like the Dallas party, straight to the car. It's nuts. But on Tuesday, I had to be back in the writer's room for the television show. So there was no sort of lag there. And then I'm working on a script with Guillermo Del Toro, so we're working on that simultaneously. And we're tuning up this musical. So I've been working on sort of 3 things, at the same time. So I haven't really, it's just less traveling, and all the Oscar push and all that, but it's still a lot of different work, and I have 2 babies at home. So, I haven't been able to rest. I'm hoping in the beginning of May I'll get a week away and just with my family to unwind and chill out. Right.
Yeah. Does it affect your creative process to have everything kind of on top of you, or do you work better with stress like that?
I think I constantly work with stress. I don't know if I work better with stress. It's a little challenging just because generally if you're working on one project, when you're in your off time, like if you're making dinner for the kids or walking the dog or whatever, your subconscious is working on the job you're on. So let's say that was Birdman. When you have multiple projects, it doesn't really happen that way because you're thinking about too many things. So it sort of takes more focus, if you know what I mean? Like you have to literally concentrate and put your brain toward which project you're thinking about at that moment. So that's the difference.
So what is it like? So you're working on a project with Guillermo Del Toro. What has that been like?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, we met a while ago through through Alejandro, and then he had this little sort of personal movie he wanted to make and approached me, and the idea was so beautiful. He's sort of this, like, I mean this in the best way. He's like he has the imagination of a brilliant child. Like there's nothing, he's not boxed in by reality in a way, and in the best way. I mean, in the sort of poetic way. And I think if you look at Transparent and or Hellboy or Pacific Rim or, you know, such a spectrum of stuff that he's done, but it's amazingly adrenalizing to sit with him because the imagination can go anywhere, and then anything can be possible, which is just amazing.
Have you ever seen his sketches and his notebooks?
Some, but he's going to show me. We're getting together in a couple of weeks, and he's going to bring me a whole series of them, and then I'm going to go visit him in his house, and I can't wait. I'm sort of afraid. I can't wait.
Is he in Mexico City?
No, he lives in Toronto.
Oh, okay.
He lives in Toronto and travels around, and I'm in New York, so we're not that far away from each other.
Okay. Yeah, his. I think they've even published some of his, book of sketches and everything. They're kind of legendary at this point.
Amazing.
So I wanted to jump in with kind of a discussion of screenwriting and your process, and the IFA is primarily for education. So if I can, I would really like to kind of discuss your process for writing and, you know, talk about, for example, if we could start out by talking about how you start with a project and how you take, you know, kind of all the ideas you have and then build that into a screenplay and your process of working on that. So, for example, let me give you an actual question.
Yeah, of course.
So you say, I've heard some of your other interviews and you talk about having a blueprint before you actually start with your first draft. Can you talk about the process behind creating that blueprint?
Yeah, for me, depending on what the story is going to be, and it doesn't sort of matter what medium I'm in. For example, now I'm working on a musical for Broadway. I'm working on a television series with my Birdman cohorts, and I'm working on a film. But what I find everything in common is I need to get the structure in order. If I can understand the entire structure of it, then it's easy for me to tie together sort of scenes and leitmotifs and everything that'll make it cohesive. Some people sort of write from the first page and as if they're holding a flashlight and step every 5 feet and they see that far in front of them and just keep going until they get somewhere. I can't work that way. For me, I need to know, in a way, where the end is, or at least what the vicinity of the end is. I think for me, the sort of Aristotelian philosophy of surprising inevitability is the most important thing I know, is to get to an ending that's at once surprising and absolutely inevitable. Holy cow, I can't believe that happened. And of course that happened. They've been telling me that was going to happen for the last 2 hours. And in order for me to get there, I sort of have to know at least the zip code of where I'm starting and the zip code of where I'm going to finish. You know what I mean? So I map everything out to death. And I stare at that structure in front of my face, whether it's on my bulletin board, on cards, or on paper. I sketch, charts a lot. And I stare at it and stare at it and stare at it. And like I was saying before, as I'm doing other things generally, like, just, you know, you work a little bit and as I'm living my life, I say, oh, that's a scene. Yeah. And I look at the structure, I say, how does that fit in? And slowly it comes together sort of like a puzzle. And then once I have enough scenes sitting within the structure itself, then I'll procrastinate for as long as I humanly can to avoid writing. And then I'll finally, when I can't hold it anymore, I generally like to go away because there are just too many distractions. I'm not the kind of person who can wake up at 6 in the morning and work from 6 to 9 every day like some people do. It's just incredible to me. I wish I could. But I'll sort up. I'll know the structure inside out. I know the basic framework and story, and then I'll go away. Sometimes I go to this little place. It's not fancy at all, but it's in Puerto Rico on the West Coast and in Isabela, and there's no internet really speaking of. You have to sort of go to the office to get into it, but barely a phone, certainly no TV or distraction. And I'll just spend a week or 10 days there and hammer out a draft. So I wrote a draft of Birdman there. I wrote a draft of my play Red Dog Howl's there. I wrote On Your Feet, Gloria Estefan musical there. But that can only come to me, like I said, after I've looked at the structure and I know it just inside out, which could take months. You know, in some cases it could take 8 or 9 months. Sometimes it's a little shorter. But for me, structure is everything. And even when you're going to make a film like Birdman, which seems like a fever dream, you know, Alejandro just, you know, being his genius maniac self, you know, if you're going to take a flight of fancy that big, you had better be steeped in structure. And, you know, Nicolás and myself, you know, as crazy as Birdman looks, structure it, you know, just vigorously.
Right.
Because we thought if we had a very strong foundation, then we would be able to take the crazy leaps, you know, pardon the Birdman reference, but to take the leaps of faith and just jump. And so for me, that's what structure is. Structure for me is the road. So at least I know I can drive on, you know, and it's everything for me.
Now, when you're creating that blueprint, are you assuming that once you get into the writing process, a lot of that creative, a lot of the ideas are going to take over and you can kind of like go off of your blueprint? Or are you trying to put everything that you possibly can into the blueprint before you start writing, so you know where the jokes are and you know where everything's going to go?
Well, a little bit of both. The latter part less. I make a structure that holds the story. I know where the story is turning. I know sort of what the themes are, again, what my leitmotifs are, you know, that weave it together and everything. But yes, on the other hand, once I have it, I feel so confident that I know where it's going, that I have no fear there. In a way, I'm always afraid to write, you know, but I'm not afraid I don't know what the story is. And so I'm able to take a breath and close my eyes and let my imagination and let my subconscious sort of take over a little bit. And so, then it starts to find its own weirdness and life and strange moments may come. Like I don't plan those moments in advance. I just plan the structure of the story in advance and then let the imagination take over.
And is that where you think, for example, you say the surprising inevitability, does that come from like the sitting down and writing and just like going in directions that you didn't think of, but it just came as you were kind of like improvising and writing and in the world? Yeah.
If you look at, for example, and this is a few of us writing, but when Alejandro gave us the basic idea of what he wanted to do, is it's film in one long take, and you know, we knew there's this middle-aged guy floating around in his underwear at the beginning. That's an image Alejandro just hang his head, you know. But when you look at Birdman, for example, when we talk about surprising inevitability, for whatever anybody, you know, because people love Birdman, people hate Birdman. It's a very polarizing film, and the endings are polarizing. But in the end, when you look at that film, the first image, the first scene of that film is a guy, and if you forget that he's in his underwear and you forget that he's floating 3 feet off the ground for a minute, you realize it's a man meditating. Once you see it's a man meditating, you realize, you say, okay, what's the fundamental value of meditation? And that's to silence the voice in your head, right? That's what meditation is, to silence everything out. Well, in the last scene of this movie, for better or worse, he does exactly that. Do you know what I mean? Or you could say on stage he does that. But at the end of this film, he does exactly what he was doing in the first scene of this film, which is trying to silence that voice in his head. In the case of Birdman, that voice is the Birdman himself, or his ego. But you can see where that's surprisingly inevitable. Surprising because, holy cow, either whatever you choose, the people that hated the ending where he jumps, or the people that loved the ending where he shoots himself, because one's sort of an epilogue, you know. But you look at it and you say, holy cow, let's just say he shot himself. And then you say, of course he shot himself. He was trying to quiet that voice in my head. They told me that in the first scene. So the rest of the journey is going to be that. And so you get to a point where it's both surprising and, if you're paying attention, inevitable.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's floating in the first frame. He leaps at the end, and people are like, does he fly or does he fall? Well, that's up to you, but he was floating in the first scene.
So is that something you realized when you were starting and creating this, that this is kind of how it's going to end?
Well, the ending was always going to, the epilogue was the harder part, because Alejandro felt strongly that if he decided the fate of Regan Thompson, then he was deciding the fate of the audience themselves. So he wanted them to make that commitment, that decision. And when you talk to people, some people say he died. Some people have these incredible, elaborate theories about how Emma Stone's character breaks with reality and
Right.
And how he's already dead in the last scene, and because people just want to innately satisfy themselves with the story. Alejandro he felt like if he whatever he said would definitely happened to Regan Thompson, then it would be small. But if the audience was forced to take a leap themselves and either have childish hope or very pragmatic and cynical, anger, one way or another, it was going to say more about them and their own selves than it would be about, the film itself. But the basic structure of the film led from the meditation to when he shoots himself on stage and gets the standing ovation, which is just before the end. And if you look at just the structure of that chunk of script, it's incredibly structured. He was this person, Mike Shiner comes in sort of right there at the end of Act 1. The previews right around Act 2. The critic at the beginning of Act 3 says, I'm going to destroy your play. It's his last hope, so he's screwed. So it has a primal structure to it. And once we had that, then we were able to go bananas in between and try to tell the story we wanted to tell.
Now, you had mentioned it being also kind of a hero's journey. Is there any, Joseph Campbell going on with this?
Yeah, of course. I think there's Joseph Campbell going on in mostly anything, isn't there? But it's that, here's a man who's playing, when you talk about this sort of the mythical stature of what Birdman is to him and what Birdman is to people, and how these people are seeking that moment where they can feel special. I mean, it's a movie about ego. So these things are big. And when you look at an antagonist, people get confused because the critic, for example, she's antagonistic, but she's not the antagonist, right? Because a man who's silencing the voice in his head, naturally, if that voice is ego, then that's the antagonist, isn't it? The only antagonist in Birdman is Regan Thompson himself, right? He's the one that gets in his way. He's the one that's ruining his relationships. He's the one that keeps telling him he's special. He's the one that gets himself in trouble. So it does have this sort of larger mythical, Joseph Campbell-esque quality, as does, I think, any story of size, about human beings inside.
Now, when you write, are you, is it like when you say you go to Puerto Rico and you kind of isolate yourself, is that because you need to completely live in that world for a little bit and live with those characters and kind of go into your head and just kind of be there without, kids running around and interaction? Yeah,
I mean, I think that, if I'm going to be very honest about that, I really do believe I have some level of ADD or ADHD. I already have enough time focusing at all, but when you have, for example, your email ringing, beeping 100 times a day and, the kids running around, it's impossible to get to the quiet place. And for me, a huge chunk of time of my writing process, even when I'm away, is laying on a bed, looking at the ceiling, or sitting down in Puerto Rico, just sitting on the these little porches, and I just sit there and look at at the ocean and, or the sea, as it were. And I spend a lot of time, and I'll just wait and I'll run it through in my head, and when the idea comes, I'll sit down at the computer and write out the idea. So it's this game of patiently waiting and me not forcing it. So I need the space to be able to do that in the quiet and the stillness to be able to do that. Otherwise, I find myself manipulating or forcing everything. And I can't write that way. I'm no good at it. Some people are great at it. I'm terrible.
And forcing, you mean people who force themselves to sit down and write and create stuff, or people who...
Yeah, they say, damn it, I know where the story's going and I'm going to write 15 pages a day, and they just, whether they're good pages or bad pages, I can go on a space where I don't, even when I'm away and I have 10 days to come back with a draft, I can go a full day without writing a word, which is scary as hell, because it always feels like, oh my God, this is the time it's not going to come. This is the time I'm not going to get it. It's really an act of faith. And I guess it's made better by having succeeded a few times. So you sort of have a little bit of faith, but I swear to God, it's just as frightening every single time. You're like, this is the time it ain't going to happen. This is the time everybody finds out I'm a fraud. And that's a really genuine feeling, I swear.
You have your greatest hits album, but you're not making any more new hits after that.
Yeah, that's right. What do I write next?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but when you finally sit down, is it difficult to write that first draft? I mean, is it as painful as for you as like, I remember Lawrence Kasdan mentioned that it was just like, it was always torture for him to sit down and write a first draft.
That's funny that Larry said that. I know Larry well because I did The Bodyguard with him.
Oh, really?
the musical.
Right.
No, I think less for me because, it's always terrifying, but I don't think it's terrifying for the same reason, in fear of being redundant. For the same reason is that I know the parameter. I know the tune. I just gotta go piece by piece and put it together. So that scares me less. I'm always scared, but I think I have a little more trust because I can see the story laid out in front of me. All that's left for me is, I don't know who said it. You must have heard this in the course of that. Somebody once said that writing was like, I think writing narrative was like, as opposed to creating something, was like brushing off the dirt off a fossil. You go little by little until you realize what you have. And for me, it absolutely feels like that. It feels like you just wait and you're like, it'll come, and then the story already exists. All the moments already exist. It's about being quiet enough and having your sort of structure and your sense of what story is down, understanding your themes, and then just waiting and just sifting off the dust. And you go, oh, right, that. And then the story gets uncovered. I really do feel that way.
So what is the process for developing characters? Like when you were writing Birdman, did the characters start just kind of developing? And I know you were working with Nico on that. And did you guys kind of like, do you start out by looking inward and saying, okay, I've got a guy here who's meditating, trying to get rid of the voices. And then you kind of, do you relate that to yourself, or are you kind of like mimicking in a way other people, or how do you create those characters?
In the case of Birdman, it's different because there's really sort of a few of us working. So Regan, when it was going to be about ego and sort of Alejandro looking at his middle-aged self and his ego, he had a sense of what that guy was. So for Nico and I, it was about characterizing behavior. The more behavior we could give him, the more the character we started to understand it better. But in the case of, say, Mike Shiner, I'm from the theater, I'm a theater creature. So I know that guy. And I am that guy a little bit. I had all the people that I work with here in New York when they saw that first scene in the kitchen when he was talking about, what's the action and don't be redundant and all that. They're like, oh my God, I was having nightmare flashbacks and you yelling at me at rehearsal. So you bring something of yourself into it. And in other cases, like for me, the ones that were close to me that I was writing, because I feel like Nico and Alejandro really had more of a grasp, and I followed their lead on Regan. My characters are really, when you talk about like as a group working, you sort of focus on those. Mine were more the Mike Shiner, Emma Stone's character Sam. Like those are ones that my voice could, come out in, and they were sort of the sound of their dialogue, sort of with Emma defined who that character was going to be. The sort of at once sort of bitchy and sassy and precocious and on the other side, this sort of really innocent, hopeful, thing. And God knows how lucky can a human being get to have Emma Stone do it, because she's a monster. And the same, by the way, from Michael and Ed Norton. These guys were blessed. But starting with Sam, for example, it was the dialogue, it was the sound of the dialogue. Because once I'd written that monologue of, you're not important, get used to it, I knew sort of who she was. And Alejandro, we all had an idea who she was, but once I started making the sounds come out of her mouth, the character got more and more defined. So I think we all sort of sketched different parts of it. Like Nico had this beautiful moment with where Michael Keaton has the baloney, and he's like, this play is like a tiny version of himself, like tapping on the balls with a little hammer,
Uh-huh.
And it's this absurd, beautiful moment, and only Nico, like, that's the mind of Nico. He has this poetic rhythm to himself, where I'm much more sort of pragmatic and hammering away at the dialogue, making more, aggressively action-oriented scenes. And I think and Alejandro is sort of a poet. And so altogether, that's what makes it really interesting. I think the collective soup that Birdman became. But finding characters almost always is about A, behavior, and B, the sound of their voice once I start writing it. I learn a lot about them after I see them and often the first scene I write.
Now, having your own, you've got 2 daughters, right?
I do, yeah.
So is there a part of you that's like, that's your worst nightmare?
That was literally my worst nightmare. Yeah, I have a 4-year-old and I just imagine her in that spot. I came home the other week, and she said, my mother was taking care of her while we went to the Golden Globes. No, the other month, I should say. And I came home and my daughter said, Daddy, first thing I walked in, she said, Daddy, you won a Golden Globe. And I said, yeah. And she said, do you know why? And I said, no, why? She said, because you're the best there is. She's a 4-year-old. And I said, right. I don't know who taught you that, but you remember that for the rest of your life. Because when you're 16 and you hate me, you better remember you said that one time. I wish I had it on tape. So yeah, Emma and Sam in the movie, that's my worst nightmare of Maya in 15 years or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's like the trauma that I have. Like I've got a 7-year-old son, and I was traumatized, like watching Boyhood and movies like that. Just like, you just want to hold on to the moment because you know that as soon as they get into those teenage years, they're going to completely start changing on you.
Yep. And they're going to want their independence. And then God forbid one day they're going to find out that we're human, that we're not God. Because I remember, do you remember that with your parents? Like the day you're like, oh, right. He's actually a person. I'm trying to keep that.
Just people.
Yeah. I want to keep that a secret as long as I possibly can.
Okay. So let me get back on track with, now working with Alejandro, when you first heard about the concept of the film being all one long take and that you wouldn't be able to use, what a lot of screenwriters, use is they'll come in early and leave, come in late and leave early and all these little tricks that they kind of hide behind. Was your background in theater helpful in like enabling you to kind of make everything work, end to end, and every scene had to begin with the exact ending of the scene before it?
I think that my experience in theater helped in the way that, one, you don't get a chance to really write that many monologues for film. Film just generally if you have a monologue, you have one big one and that's the story. This is more like a play. Emma has one. Michael has the one about the jellyfish. He has the one about George Clooney on the plane. You don't use it in theater. You get to do that. In film, you generally don't. So longer scenes, sort of, I was okay with. I was suited for, having written for the theater, and then just the experience of the theater itself. I know the theater intimately. I grew up in the theater, so that's something I could bring to the table to the other guys. That was a benefit. And then I'm the only English first language speaker at a bunch of us. So I could help them when it came to really just making the dialogue, sharp and getting their ideas. For example, Nico's idea, not Alejandro, would come up with a bunch of ideas, and I was able to sort of hammer them into sort of American colloquial, the sort of sound that we wanted to hear. So I think that those are the things that maybe my theater experience brought me, and I was able to bring to the group. But as for Alejandro in the one take, I think the challenge of the one take more than anything else, and I think any writers out there who are hearing or reading or whatever the team is, you understand that what people missed was once we got a shooting draft, we couldn't change it at all. We couldn't edit it at all. And if you really think about that for a minute, you think, okay, well, you wrote a script, you get on set, right? When you get on set, generally, if it seems too long, you can cut it. You can get in the middle. You can change. In ours, the camera was all choreographed, done, finished. So the camera was going to make the moves in it. So we knew that 95% of everything we wrote was going to make it to the screen. And we couldn't edit it. And it was a comedy. And then the second weapon we have as writers is in post, right? The director can go in, say, oh, this scene feels long, or that joke doesn't work. And you can cut it internally. We couldn't do any of that. So what you see on the screen is literally 95% of the shooting draft. That's as scary as it gets when it comes to writing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you writing an interview and not being able to edit it later.
Right. Well, are there, that begs the question, are there any scenes that you watch now and kind of cringe a little bit?
Yeah.
They didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, we made mistakes. Let's see if I can give you an example without pissing off anybody. I feel like there's a scene where we had with the first scene with Amy, Ryan, and Michael, when he comes in and he says, I have to sell the Malibu house. And she says to him at one point in the scene, she says, what's going on? Talk to me. And he gives the most honest answer. Michael's so good. And he says, I have a chance to do something special and I got to take it. And it's so honest from him. And we're like, oh my God, that's where you sort of love Regan. And she looks at him and she's so moved that she says, it's funny, on my way here, I was trying to remember what finally broke us up. And then he goes into a monologue, a narcissistic monologue about being on the plane that was going to be George Clooney's face on the front of the paper if it went down and not his. And he does this whole narcissistic monologue, and she says, I forgot, she pulls the clip out of his hair, which is Amy. But the scene should have been over there. It should have been, he does the monologue, she says, now I remember. Right? So she says, I forget why we broke up. He says, me. She's supposed to say, yeah, I remember now. And get up and go and say, look, it's your house. Do what you want with it, but take care of our daughter. And then she turns around and says, you're not Clara Fawcett, Regan. That should have been the scene. Instead, we got this longer bit, where she takes the thing out of his hair, she walks. He asks her, why did we break up? And it's still good, but it's not as good as if it was edited. Like, if we could have edited it, it would have been a lot better. So that scene should have been over because the action is finished. Once the action, I think Shanley was a genius. John Patrick Shanley once said, when two characters on stage agree, the scene's over. Right. And he's being his normal, clever self, but it's almost exactly right. And in that scene, they came to an understanding. The scene was over. You don't have to talk about anything else. And if you want,
so did you have some sort of like mental chart or something of like where exactly Michael Keaton's character was at all times? Like okay, we have this scene and this is where he's at now, and then this happens to him, and is there some way that you guys were always on the same page with that, or was it just the script?
No, it's the structure again. We knew what was going to happen next, so we knew before we knocked him down again, we have to give him hope. And so when you watch the script, that's sort of what happens. So, for example, he's excited to have Mike Shiner in the thing, and then boom, Act 1 was a dude. The preview comes and the guy destroys the set, And he's like, get rid of him. Now he's knocked down. And then Michael takes Ed out. This is another scene, by the way, you could have edited. And they're out on the street. He's like, let's go get some coffee. And they go to this bar. And basically, the action is Michael has to put him in his place, right, to reel him in. The obstacle, if we talk about sort of, again, the Aristotelian, action, conflict, reverse, which is what we're always striving for, I think. So the action is Michael has to reel Ed in. The conflict is Ed is being stubborn, and he's like, this isn't even your town. This is my fucking town. Like, we're not in Hollywood. This is not a backlot. This is New York City, and this is how we do it. So Michael gets smacked in the sort of objection, the obstacle of it. And at the height of Ed saying, you're not even important here. Frankly, in New York, nobody gives a shit about you. And then the tourist comes up and goes, aren't you Regan Thompson? And she marginalizes Mike by making him take a picture of them. So she doesn't even recognize who the great theater actor is. She just knows Birdman. And that's the reverse, right? That's the reversal. So action, conflict, and then there's your reverse. So measuring where Regan was going to be at any given time is to take him on a journey, build him up, give him some hope, and then knock him down again. And that's a series of, that's the Candide-esque, vision of a character who's eternally, fundamentally optimistic, but just things keep falling on his head. And that's how we measured Regan's line. And he would slowly spiral out of his sanity. Birdman, as you watch the movie, sort of gets louder and more prominent. In the first scene, it's a poster in the background. And, of course, by the third act, it's this guy flying behind him, So that his brain is sort of switching over. So that sort of spiral of losing his sanity is also in play the whole time.
Now, are you always aware of how you're bringing an audience in and letting them access the story through, like, say, for example, letting them figure things out and put things together in order to kind of pull them into the story further?
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally that's good writing. I don't know how conscious I am of it while I'm writing. I think you want to leave questions open. I talk to my writers in my writer's room for the TV show. Nico and I are running that room and writing the show, and then we have three playwrights, three women who are talented women. Tanya Barfield, Hallie Pfeiffer, and Molly Reitzel. And I talk to them so much about, let's not get caught in the trap of that character would never do that. Because that's the trap. If you can predict what a character will do, then the audience can too, and they have nothing to wait for. So rather than saying, for example, Regan would never do that, you start with the question, why did he do that? That's insane. I didn't think he would do that. Why did he? And when you start searching for those answers, you get to a place where the audience isn't ahead of you. You know? So you just, I think you always want to leave questions for the audience. You don't want to answer questions for the audience. So
well, there's a moment that I absolutely love. That's kind of not one of the major moments, but after Michael Keaton has, he fell asleep outside. He gets like a bottle of whiskey, and you hear the guy like yelling on the road. And you hear that throughout the whole scene, and he's yelling and yelling and yelling, and you kind of assume something about that person. And then as he walks past him, he says that he's an actor and he's kind of like auditioning in a way. And it's a completely different, like what's happening with that. It's like a layer that you weren't even really thinking about. And it's just like adds a little something on top of the actual scene that's going on. And I just thought that was pretty amazing, but I didn't know what your take was on something like that.
Well, that scene was sort of manifested itself in different ways. He's doing the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech for Macbeth. Like I said, a walking shadow, a poor player struck and slept, his moan on the stage and was heard from no more to the tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury signifying nothing. And that's really what we're talking about with Regan and this movie. But also you have this homeless guy or bum, it sounds like, who's just spewing out this monologue, which in essence highlights Regan's mediocrity. And when Regan gets to him, it's a flashback, if you notice, to the brilliant Jeremy Shamos, who plays the bad actor in the beginning. And he overacts and he looks at Regan and says, "Is that too much? It's too much than I can see on your face. I just wanted to give you a range." And this crazy guy in the street utters the same line. So he speaks out the monologue in breath and then looks at Regan and says, "That's too much? I just want to give you a range." And you see Michael look at him. So it's really Michael's brain starting to come apart on him, you know, and those weird lights. There's no reason for those rings of lights to be there, but just the genius of Alejandro, you know. So yeah, there is a mediocrity shouting at him on the street, you know.
Right. Now, can you talk a little bit about, there were some things that I wanted to ask you about what Michael Keaton's character is going through. You know, when the climax happens, when, you know, we've had this buildup of Birdman that starts out as a voice in his head, then becomes an actual, you know, person following him around. And then finally, it appears that he just kind of, what's happening there? Does he accept it and like start believing the voice? And kind of, my idea on it was that he was kind of going insane, but it felt good. Like it was like a comfy feeling to embrace that finally.
Yeah, and I think that's what Regan says when he's on his dressing room table talking to his ex-wife. And he says, right. I have this voice in my head, and it's scary, but it's comforting. Yeah, I think when all is lost for him at sort of the top of the third act, which is where the critic says to him, "I'm going to kill your play," because that was the last hope he had, right? Of this thing being a success. And she basically says before the third act, you lose, I win. And now we're in a place where we're like, wait a minute, it has to be a success. I mean, how could it? So then he has to drink and he spews out his monologue to her and goes to get that booze like you were saying. And then when he wakes up, basically the voice in his head is saying, forget those people, forget everything else. You're a legend. And you can still be a legend. And he says, let's go back to that theater and show them one more time what we're capable of. Show them one more time. Give them something they'll never forget. So he's saying, go and be the legend that you are. Later on, we'll come to understand that has to do with the real gun and what happens on stage. He gives the most honest moment of his life. because in that scene, he's not talking about the scene itself. And I think that was an interesting scene to write, is the play within the play. Because it happens 3 times. When you hear it the first time and he says, you don't love me, you never will, why do I have to beg you to love me? I don't exist. I don't exist. It's in the first one, he has the wig on and it disappears in the comedy of Ed Norton's erection. And so the farce of that makes you not listen to what he's saying a little bit. It's a diversion. The second time he says it is when he walks in from the street in his underwear and he's holding his fingers out like a gun. And you realize he's starting to lose his shit. So you hear the words a little bit, but it's the same words. Why do I have to get you to love me? Why don't you love me? All I want is that. I don't exist. I don't even exist. You don't love me. And we don't hear it yet again. We hear it but don't hear it because we're watching in his underwear. We're laughing at the uncomfortable mania of the scene. And then the third one, when he walks on with a loaded gun, we realize he's not talking to her. He's saying the lines, and the lines mean it to him. He's asking his audience, right? Why don't you love me anymore? All I ever wanted was for you to love me. And you don't, and you never will. I don't exist. And it's be Michael. And for the first time, he's really the words meaning to him. So he has this very pure moment on the stage because he's telling the truth. He's asking his fame, his audience, his family. He's asking everybody, why don't you love me? All I want is to be loved. And then goes ahead and gives them something they'll never forget. So Birdman plays the part in that third act when it finally comes to life. It's that argument that you may not be great at this, you may not be a great actor, but you're a legend, and go and be that. And that for Michael, it's him embracing. Reed Thompson and Michael Keaton as the actor. It's him embracing what he is. You know, for that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, right before that, it shows that the show is actually having success, right? I mean, he's got flowers in the room. That we show a scene of people talking about how good the show is.
Yeah.
So is that intentional, that it's like he's actually having success, but that doesn't really even matter to him? He's like already.
He's in this performance. It's before and after, he's giving the most honest performance of his life. So when we come in, we realize, like he's not manic. He's laying down very calm on the table. His wife says, you're really calm. He's like, yeah, I am. Because he's embraced it. Right. And so he's on stage, if you look at the backstory of that scene, he's on stage playing a mediocre person, being a mediocre person, and obviously doing well at it. So in accepting himself, he finally did the best job he could on the stage.
Now, if we can, for a few minutes, I was hoping we could talk about the actual filming process and what it was like kind of being around Alejandro and Chivo and seeing them work. Is that okay if we go into that for just a little bit?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For all
let me ask you, was when you guys first started, I assumed that all the actors were a little, cold and like not really like sure how everything was going to work. Was it the process of shooting everything straight like that in single takes? Was that something that you guys had to, develop and get more comfortable with?
Alejandro had rehearsed them. I think the main thing on the set of Birdman was everybody was appropriately scared shitless. Do you know what I mean? Thank God when we got there, the writers, most of our work was done already, and we were scared shitless months before that. So we sort of passed on the baton. But the actors were appropriately scared, not terrified, but appropriately scared because, and so were the gaffers, and so were the cameramen, and so was everybody. Because if you were the one that screwed up a 12-minute take, it was going to feel bad. So everybody was sort of, you always hear Emma or Zach talk on television shows about how, like Zach, like Michael does that scene in the dressing room where he's just bearing his soul when he's like, it's really a pursuit question. He just gives it all. Everything there is to give that Michael Keaton had, he gave in that scene. And of course, Zach has to come in at the end of it and go, how you doing, buddy? And Zach was like, if I fuck that line up, pardon my language, if I screw this up, like, what am I going to do? Look at Michael and say, oh, sorry, buddy, can you do that again? And same with Emma, when she comes on after Ed Norton and Michael Keaton in their first sort of bombastic, exciting, long scene, and she just comes on to take these costumes. And she was appropriately scared, which is to say, if I blow this, then I would have wasted that whole 10 minutes of stuff she just did. So Alejandro and Chivo had it choreographed in advance. They rehearsed twice, once with stand-ins in Los Angeles and once with the actors in New York. And that camera was choreographed from first to last moment, meticulously. And to know what they went through and to watch them work is simply a masterclass. Like, if you're going to get to write, God willing, you get to write with Alejandro directing and Chivo shooting, because they're as good as it gets. I mean, they're as good as it gets. They're masters. I mean, we'd be sitting on the stage and we'd need like a plug line, like something to fill in some space. And I'd be like, this is what the camera's doing. And they would talk at 60 miles an hour. And I'd be like, just trying to keep up, just trying to keep up. And she would be like, we're going to move here and cross here. And Alejandro would be like, right, the light has come from here. So we need 3 words and some action. And you're like, oh,
so they have kind of a shorthand of just like, I mean, they've been working together for so long that they just kind of can finish each other's sentences, I assume.
Well, I think, unless I'm mistaken, this is their first time working together. Chivo with Cuarón a bunch.
That's okay. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. Roger for some reason, I thought they'd worked together.
Right. No, Rodrigo Prieto, I think, did like Babel and 21 Grams and Beautiful. Who's another genius. But they did develop a shorthand and awfully quickly. Like, they both knew what sort of jazz they were playing, and they're amazing. I learned so much watching them, and they're also both, aside of being visionary, they're both the most generous human beings. So they don't leave you out of it. Alejandro embraces ideas from everywhere. Like, he's not one of those people that don't talk to me, you don't know what you're doing. He'll listen, because if he hears one sentence from anybody, but it's the right sentence, he's on it. Like, he has no sort of wall, no distance, no pedestal that he stands on. He's in the dirt with you. I think that's why actors react so well, and that's why movie after movie, everybody he directs gets nominated for something somewhere, because he stands right there in the trenches with them, and they trust him. And then you get performances like the ones you saw here from Michael or Bardem in Beautiful, or Emma in this movie, which nobody sort of expected, except she's she's really a monster actress. But he gets there because people have faith and trust, and the writers do too. Writing with him is the same experience. You just trust that his compass is right, and that he embraces good ideas, and that he gets enthusiastic and energetic, and it's a really, I mean, I'd like to give you dirt, but it's a dream collaboration. You know what I mean?
We're not a gossip show.
It's a dream for any writer out there. I mean, God, it's easy for me now to say, hey, you should work with Alejandro. It's so
sure.
Yeah, if you have a chance, why not? But working with somebody like that, somebody who's open and generous, and that you just have this faith that if you jump, you're going to be okay. Like, if you throw in a shitty idea, it's going to be okay. Like, that's an amazing thing to have on a set. And I think it in this case, it was the reason that this movie in the end hopefully worked.
Now, was this, had you been on film sets before, or was this kind of the first time you had really been? Yeah.
Yeah. This is the first one I was totally immersed in. They shot here in New York, and, again, the rewriting consisted of slug lines. Like, the camera's taking a little longer than we thought to get there. Can we extend this, or do you have another thought here? But it's the first time that I stood on set, sort of with the cams on, looking at the monitor, watching it happen, watching the director and cinematographer work, watching the actors up close. It was really amazing.
Now, for the people who listen to this, who are, directors and cinematographers, we that's something that we cover a lot. Can you talk about anything you learned just by watching them, or anything that surprised you about the way they worked?
I think well, I'm going to go backwards and do a callback. I found something surprisingly inevitable. And that is that both Chivo and Alejandro shoot intuitively from a place of action. So when they decide what the camera is going to do next, it's because they're living inside the character with the action shoes. And this is what separates the grown-ups from the kids, is that if you look at Emma's monologue with Michael, right? 99% of the people out there would have stayed on Michael. right? It would have been on a monologue, and it would have been all about Michael's reaction to it. Except they dealt with it from Emma's point of view because they knew she was the one with the action. She was exacting revenge on her father. And in the end, the reverse of that scene, again, I'm boring you with action conflict reverse, right? But in the end, the reverse of that scene is the overwhelming dissatisfaction and guilt that comes from how the way it turns back on her. And then if you remember in that scene, so she fires away and she says, "You are not important, get used to it." And Chivo and Alejandro stay right on Emma, on those big old eyes of hers. And you watch the regret come over like a tidal wave, which is brilliant on Emma's part. It's brilliant on Alejandro and Chivo's part to have it there. And so they come from a place in any scene where they're following the action. So the camera is inside the person. It's a very subjective experience, right? The camera reflects what any given character is feeling. And in the case of Birdman, most of the time, overwhelmingly most of the time, that's Regan Thompson. But sometimes it's Ed Norton, and sometimes it's Emma Stone, and sometimes it was Naomi Watts. But the camera lives inside their point of view. And I think that's what makes these films seem so like you're sneaking a peek into the, insides of people, That's how they do it. And they do it aggressively. Like they put the camera 6 inches away from somebody's face at sometimes, which is brave of the actors to go through. But that was something I learned that outside of their mastery of the process itself, of the photography, of the process of writing, outside of that, they're going from a pure storyteller place. They're telling the story subjectively through the character with the action. And I think that's an amazing lesson that I'll keep with me forever.
Now, I assume that there's no room for egos or anything. Everybody's just there to work hard. And I mean, one of the things that I hear from the set is just there were tons of, mistakes and errors, and they just had to keep going until they got it right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the benefit of everybody being on the high wire together. You can't blame anybody for falling off. You know what I mean? One, it naturally keeps your ego in check, because if you're going to be the one with the ego and you screw up a scene, that's going to be humiliating, But two, everybody knows how dangerous it was. So if somebody were to trip up, Emma did a bunch, everybody totally understood it. And then when she came back, she fired away and gave you those takes that you see on the screen. You know what I mean? So everybody knew the risk level. So there was a great amount of respect, for everybody, for the cameramen, for the gaffers, for everybody. There was a great amount of respect because everybody knew they could be the one to let the team down, and nobody wanted to do that.
All right. Now, do you know what Alejandro's feelings were about, there's a lot of a little bit of, I guess, mocking about blockbusters and movies I guess Iron Man and the Avengers and stuff like that. I mean, what is his take on movies like that? And possibly did he ever discuss how he feels about, say, Batman, which is obviously has to be something that was, in the air?
I don't think, it's funny. I think people misunderstood a joke. English is his second language, and sometimes his jokes don't come out the right way. And in one interview, he made a joke referring to the film about the cultural genocide, and I think it got misconstrued. I know him personally. Right. I know him well. I'm proud to call him a friend. And he likes good movies. Do you know what I mean? So if there's a well done, whatever you want to call them, studio, Hollywood, superhero, but he's going to like it. He just respects good work. I think what he can't abide himself is gratuitous work that imagines that it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because that's what people accuse him of, being self-important, which is really funny because I guess in a way we're all self-important. That's the Regan Thompson of it all. But nothing amuses me more than the people that came out criticizing Birdman who were saying, oh, the film's just, they're so self-important and patting themselves on the back. The film likes itself so much that I don't have to like it. And you're like, if you could have just pictured us 18 months ago, all literally pooping our pants, scared to death. No, it's never going to work. We're dead. This is horrible. Why do we even do this? The insecurity and doubt and fear. I think people picture us in a room going, hey, you know how we could fuck with an audience next? We could just, it was so the opposite of that. back to the original question, I think that Alejandro likes good movies. And I think those superhero movies and or Hollywood films that he's seen and really, really liked. And if it's gratuitous, I think if he feels it's gratuitous, and I carry, you have to ask Alejandro this question, but this is my interpretation of it. If he feels it's gratuitous and, manufactured, he's not going to like it. And you can tell by any of his movies, that wouldn't be his cup of tea, And I think that's how he feels. I don't think as a person, this was about the story we were writing. I think everybody took it we made fun of everybody. We made fun of writers. We made fun of actors. We made fun of critics. The critics, there's another thing. Critics are like, oh, it's unbelievable that the critic would judge it. You're like, oh my God, it's a movie. Like, the only thing that trips up the critic in our movie is her ego, just like everybody else. She has a great point when she says to him, look, you come here untrained. You've never been on a stage before, and yet you take over the Broadway theater. You guys, you hand each other awards for cartoons and pornography. You measure your work in weekends. All these things are true. And when we screened it for the executive of Fox, you could see everybody like flinking down in their chairs a little bit. And then Michael comes back and says, this is what we do. It costs you nothing. And he gives his argument back. Her argument is just as good. But what trips her up is she says, I'm going to ruin your play because I hate you. And she thinks for herself that she's capable of ruining his play or the experience. And so her problem is exactly the same as Regan's problem, which is the exact same as Mike's problem, which is ego. And that's what the movie's about.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, that's actually one of my favorite scenes, that confrontation between the two of them. Like, writing a scene like that, I don't know if that was one of the ones you focused on, but I mean, when you're in that, in a argument that, intense, are you writing both sides? Are you seeing one point of view and then you go back and write the dialogue and then you're back at it again?
Yeah. And that was one of the ones, because I had a bumpy experience. I've had bumpy experience in my life, as we all have with critics. But it wasn't about any measure of revenge at all. If you don't give her a good argument there, then his monologue that scene doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? It's like if you make a boxing picture and you don't make a good opponent. Do you know what I mean? If he's not scary, it doesn't work. Right. She comes in with a very honest argument. She's like, you are untrained at what you're trying to do here, and it's your ego that makes you think you can do it. And that hits him hard. Then he can come back and say, yeah, but I'm trying it. Do you know what I mean? Just like Ed Norton sort of says at the beginning with her, which is a scene I like, so I worked on this critically. And Ed Norton had just gotten a beat down because the tourist had recognized Michael instead of him. And then he crosses over and the critic sees him and she says, you're going to Hollywood. He says, Hollywood's coming here. She says, good luck with that. And he does the Flaubert quote, which is a man becomes a critic when he cannot be a soldier the same way a man becomes a critic when he cannot be an artist the same way a soldier becomes an informant when he can't be a soldier. And she says he's a clown in a lycra bird suit. And Ed Norton, who has every reason to throw Regan under the bus, replies, yeah, but tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, he'll be on that stage risking everything. What'll you be doing? The arguments are strong on both sides. I mean, you think about writing a scene like Michael and the critics, you have to give them both a very strong argument. Otherwise, it's unimportant. Otherwise, it's standing on a soapbox. I think critics are very touchy about that scene. Even critics who really like the movie were touchy about the scene. We made fun of everybody. And in the end, I defy any of them to tell me that scene wasn't about ego. And it wasn't about taking cheap shots or doing a fantasy about critics. That's their ego of the critics writing about the critic scene, saying, we were having our revenge fantasy on critics. No, we weren't. We were writing a movie, and she's Michael's obstacle, and her flaw is the same as his, which is ego. So it was all in the structuring of the scene.
Now, was there any sense on set? I mean, I personally am a huge, Michael Keaton fan and everything. Was there the sense that this was going to be, I know you've said in the past that you never had any expectation of how, big this was going to be, and obviously the Oscar win and all that. But was there a sense with Michael that it's he really hadn't been, starred in a lot of movies? Of course, we all grew up in the 80s and he was just huge back then with Mr. Mom and,
Johnny Dangerous,
Birdman and Beetlejuice. Johnny, of course, huge. And so when I first saw that this was being made, I thought it was like going to be a superhero movie. I didn't know anything about it. But the thing that really excited me was like, oh, Michael Keaton, maybe this will be like something that he gets back into. Some people have been talking about Beetlejuice 2 and all this other stuff. But was there that sense? I mean, maybe even just with you that like, this is pretty cool that Michael Keaton's like kind of really kicking some ass here.
We were pretty excited when we were all four writers were sitting together and his name came up, all of a sudden we were like, yeah, man, that is a good idea. And then fortunately he liked the script, and then Alejandro met with him and they got along. I think once you saw him, even at the first table read we did out in LA, there was a sense of, oh boy, like this guy is going to be awfully good in this role, awfully good. And then once you saw him on set, it was otherworldly. I mean, I could tell you stories about that another time, but there were moments when he came on stage and I was just, one of them was that last scene when he comes on, he sort of titters to himself, I don't exist. And nobody was breathing backstage. It was so electrifying. I mean, nobody was breathing. And yeah, for me who grew up with Michael Keaton, I'm 46 years old, so I grew up right at that time with Michael Keaton. It was amazing. And I'm sorry he didn't win awards or silly things in a way. I mean, they're great. We want them. It's so nice to be acknowledged. And it really is an honor, especially the people that you're with. In my case, the other writers who are, to a man, I didn't meet Gillian Flynn, but the guys I met, the Anthony McCartan and Jason, who wrote American Sniper, and Graham and Max Fry, like they're such great people. But Michael is such a big part of that movie that we don't accept that award without him. And if you watched on the awards, we were sort of holding our award out to him when Alejandro brought his name up because he was that important to the film. As was, by the way, Antonio Sanchez and drummer, but that's a different story. But Michael was this movie, and you don't win the best screenplay Oscar. It doesn't sit on my shelf, and I don't get to call myself an Oscar winner for the rest of my life without Michael Keaton. Impossible. No other human being can do that for me, and I'll owe him that forever. And he's a tremendous person and a tremendous actor. And to pull off what he pulled off, I mean, drama, comedy, timing, farce, satire.
Yeah, well, it's just like you watch that and you think, man, where's he been? You know what I mean? It's like he's such, it was just so much fun to watch him that I just remember thinking, man, it's just like you wish that. I mean, it was kind of like almost like seeing, some of these other people that were huge and then like went through a period of time, like say, like seeing John Travolta in Pulp Fiction or seeing Mickey Rourke in The Fighter or not The Fighter, The Wrestler. Yeah, The Wrestler.
Yeah.
It was just like, it was the same feeling. I mean, but even more so, just because Michael Keaton, I mean, it's like the new generation doesn't, have any concept of how, I mean, they might have seen his older stuff, but, they had no concept of how great he was.
I don't know that he ever got a chance to do as much as there. And I think he would say that too, and I think he has said that in interviews. Like, even when Michael Keaton was great, which was Hall of Fame great, he never had the opportunity to do all of that. Like, the different notes that he hits in Birdman, or how many actors could nail the timing, the comedy, the tragedy, the Buster Keaton of it all, the drama. How many actors could hit all those notes that well? I mean, it's a short list, I'll say that. It's a really short list. I mean, I almost defy you to find somebody else that could do what Michael did in that movie.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just reminding myself how much I love him. He's a terrific guy.
You think you'll have the opportunity to work together again?
I pray I do. I'm gonna beg him to be a hybrid of baseball because he loves baseball. So I'll beg him later on, but I hope so. I'd be lucky to.
Now, I'm curious about something that I haven't heard you talk about, and that's the Spanish-English part of working together. Do you guys, now I actually live in Mexico, so my wife is Mexican. So, it's always intriguing to me because, Alejandro's Mexican, Chivo's Mexican. You're Puerto Rican background, or
I'm a New Yorker. Yeah, my parents were both born here. My mother's parents were born in Cuba. Her father was born in Havana. Her mother was born in Ponce, Puerto Rico. And my father's side was Armenian.
Ah, okay. So but was there any when you work with, like, for example, with Nico and those guys who are from Argentina, is everything in English, or you guys, like, do you speak Spanish at all? Or
they are very courteous to me and always speak English. I always tell them when they get tripped up that they can go ahead and speak in Spanish, because I understand enough of it to let them speak, because sometimes they can't express themselves. But they're incredibly generous and generally always in our Skypes and everything else would always speak in English unless they got tripped up, and then sometimes they'll be like, just talk to each other in Spanish, you're fine, I'll follow, you're good. But yeah.
But was that one of the reasons why, because, I speak Spanish down here, but, there's no way. I've got, for example, I'm working on a screenplay, and I've got one of my actors doesn't speak English, and I have to write dialogue for him in Spanish. So I know that I'm never going to be able to put something that sounds right or whatever. So are you kind of the, gatekeeper with that in a way, like making sure that everything sounds right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Nico would write scenes, Alejandro would write monologues and such, and then hand it off to me. And it helps that we understand each other really well. I mean, it's a very good team in the best way. And I think if people see four names on a screenplay, are like, oh, one guy wrote it, another guy came back, and that wasn't our case. We all wrote it together, But yeah, it was my job to turn it into the language that seemed consistent. And I hope that if Birdman, you watch it from beginning to end, there's a few points where you might prick up and go, oh, that doesn't exactly sound. But for the most part, I think it has one voice, and that voice is me speaking for all of us, in that sort of pattery, New Yorky, modern colloquial way. So yeah, they trusted me with making the dialogue sound, sound authentic and because it needed to have a rhythm. And,
okay.
Yeah, writing in a second language, as you know, to try to find a rhythm is very, very difficult.
Now, have you, working with Nico as much as you have worked, have you learned things from him, from his style, or do you guys kind of learn from each other?
For sure, yeah. Nico and I, it's the oddest relationship because we're practically brothers now, and I guess
but you met on this, right? I mean, it's the first time working together.
And in the oddest circumstances, because I helped Alejandro in the early drafts of Beautiful, and then I left that project, and he brought in Nico, and when he called for Birdman, he called us both up. He called Nico and Armando to work on Beautiful, and then when he called for Birdman, he called me and said, "Hey, how would you like to work with these guys to do Beautiful?" And I said, "Sure." So when we met, you can imagine how strange that was. Like two different girlfriends of Alejandro's, you know what I mean? And it took about 2 meetings before we realized, oh, that guy, I love that guy. And I think we have almost too healthy a dose of mutual respect. To answer your question about what we learned from Nico is my alter ego in a way, where I talk to him about structure and making everything make sense. Nico has he's a novelist as well as a screenwriter. And he has the mind of a poet, and he allows himself the freedom to think way outside the box. And I think that's part of the extravagance, and I mean that in a good way, of Birdman. And I think the combination of things, of our two styles, I drive him crazy because I'm always asking why. And I think it drives him bananas, but he respects it. And on the other hand, he'll say, could you just relax, like breathe and think outside. What if Michael rode a sheep, down the street? You're like, oh, right. And it might not be a sheep down the street, but then you might end up with, him flying, and that's the power of Nico. So it's the ability to sort of let your imagination, don't be a slave to your technique, just to sometimes just let it fly. And it's been a great lesson, and he's a great collaborator. He and I right now are in the writer's room for the TV show and just having a great time of it. Whether or not it stinks, we'll find out. But we're having a good time writing it. Right.
That's the 1%, right? You guys are working. Are you working on are you on the blueprint stage, or are you guys cranking up the scripts now?
Yeah, we're in scripts. We got a little extra time because Alejandro's up in Calgary with the Revenant, so we had a little cushion of time. We got to write 10. I think we're somewhere on the 6 mark right now. But we're taking our time trying to do it right. And it's exciting. It's a very difficult show. It's very exciting. Seemingly impossibly complex story to tell, but, you know, with him at my side, I feel like we could do it.
Well, that's awesome. Let me, I always end the podcast with two main questions. One thing I wanted to ask, you know, is what have been your influences? What are your favorite kind of screenplays, or what have even plays, or what are the things that have really influenced you? And what are some, are there any books that have influenced you in terms of, you know, like The Hero's Journey? I know you had mentioned is one of your books that you like, but what resources for other filmmakers do you think you could recommend?
The movies and screenplays that influenced me were the ones I grew up with. I started watching movies very young. I lived across the street from this movie theater. I used to sneak in and watch movies over and over. That's when they just had one movie at a time and it just kept repeating. So those were the screenplays like And Justice for All, Levinson and Curtin, Network, Great Santini, Breaking Away. Those were like Kramer versus Kramer. That sort of character-driven drama were always my favorite. Though I do like the sort of bigger ones as well. Like Amadeus is one of my favorite films of all time as well. But I like things that are really heavy into character. I'm less likely to like something that's concept driven. You know what I mean? I appreciate them, but they're not my cup of tea. I won't name any, insult any, because they're great movies, but I think you know what I mean.
Right.
And for me, I don't read a lot of novels, but I read endlessly biographies on writers. I'll read any book anybody gives me on theory. I must have read, you know, Mamet and Goldman, you know, their essay books, I don't know, 1,000 times. I have like multiple copies around my house. 3 Uses of the Knife, Which Lie Did I Tell? I'm always fascinated. And then I read biographies of writers, like the Saroyan. I love the William Saroyan biography, Hemingway. If you look at my shelves, it's all that stuff. And it always started, I read something and I'm inspired to write, you know? So for me, it's that. And I still haven't stopped. I'm 46 years old and I will still pick up any book I find on theory. You know, sometimes I'll read 7 pages in and think, okay, this is crap. But I'll start it. And if it's even halfway interesting, I'll read it because it just reminds me of what I know, even when I'm disagreeing with it. And for me, like I said, my foundation is entirely based on structure and theory. So, those are the books that sort of, really inspire me. William Ball had a very simple book called A Sense of Direction. That's just so eloquent about the actor and about, I love those sorts of books, and they inspire me.
I'm writing those down real quick.
Yeah.
The Sense of Direction.
I can walk to my shelves and look at the ones I love if you want. Harold Klerman.
Yeah, I love that too. You know, sorry, go ahead.
Harold Klerman on directing. It's an amazing book. It's about theater, but it's an amazing book on sort of the structure of storytelling.
Do you have any plans to try and direct a film in the future?
You know, it come up a lot, and I wasn't. I've been very afraid to do that because as you can tell from this whole conversation, I very much need to know what I'm doing. And people would say, well, surround yourself with good people. And I believe that, but I sort of want to learn what I'm doing first. But there has been talk of it, and I think I'm just going to watch on set for a little while. But I do have there's a play I wrote. Actually, it was a play that Alejandro read when he first got in touch with me, that he loved and then called me to work with him in the beginning stages of Beautiful. And it's a play called Still Life. And I wrote it. It's published. And I'm going to adapt it into a screenplay this summer. And if I was going to direct, that might be the first one because it's so personal and I know it intimately. And I have some great people who worked on Birdman who said they were willing to work with me on it. So I may finally do that, but I won't do it unless I feel like my baseball movie will probably be shot first. I wrote a baseball movie called The Year of the Monarchs, and we're producing it with Mandalay, and I think that I'll stay very close to whoever the director is, if they let me. I certainly stayed close to Alejandro. Alejandro said when I'm ready to do it that he would be there in any capacity I needed to help, which is an amazing asset. Perhaps Guillermo.
Well, I know a lot of people that would pretty much, give everything they have to sit beside Alejandro and Chivo and just like see that whole, just what they're doing,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a master class right there.
It's a master class. It really is every single day. So I may do it with my play Still Life. That may be the one, maybe sometime in 2016.
Now, one of the things I had been writing not too long ago, just you reminded me of this, was the idea of when you're financing movies and putting all these movies together, one of the things that we try to do is talk about how first-time filmmakers can make their first film. And one of the big ideas with that is trying to make a film that only takes place in one location. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts, because I know that writing a play is similar to kind of having to make, I had heard that one of the main things that you have to do is take your character, and instead of having all these outward things that happen to them, that you have to like track the inward journey of them and like, where are they at this moment? And I know we kind of already talked about that. I just wonder if you had any more thoughts on that.
We just rephrase the question for me.
Okay. So what is the secret of writing a screenplay that takes place in one location and is primarily character and dialogue based versus action, and we can go to a million different locations and have car chases? What is the real key to being able to write that kind of screenplay?
Scenes. I think Larry Kazan once said to me, sort of, I love talking to these people because like the genius just spills out of their mouth like it's ready to say something. You're like, what did you just say? Like, I think that's going to be in my Bible, And like Stanley saying two characters agree, the scene's over. Like, what? That's genius. And he just half flipped it out of his mouth. But Larry once said to me, if you have enough scenes that are good scenes that are pertinent to the plot and the structure, 7, 8, 9 good scenes, you got a movie. The rest will come together. I think the trick of being in one place, when you try to think of the best movies that were shot that way, I mean, I know they went outside a little bit. Reservoir Dogs is a lot in that warehouse, in and around that warehouse. They do have flashbacks, to the office or the heist or the leading car, but it's very brief. I'm trying to think of what are the most successful movies that did that.
Just one location?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like 12 Angry Men is probably the best example.
12 Angry Men.
Or Cube. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Which one?
Cube.
No.
Or maybe it was The Cube.
12 Angry Men is a play, so they just shot the play. That naturally is going to do that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that I think that basically you're shooting a movie that's a play. There's another one that just came out where everybody's in, it's called Exam.
Right.
And it takes place in one room with like 6 or I think it's like 6 different people, and they all are given a piece of paper, and they all have to like figure out what the answer to one question is. And the whole thing is based on dialogue.
Right. The Breakfast Club, I guess.
Yeah, perfect.
I think when you look at those movies, and if we look at them and see what they have in common, it's that rather than changing location, they change scene and scene partner. Mm-hmm. I think that if you have gripping scenes, depending on how many characters you have, and you can change the feeling. So if it's just 2 people, for example, Oleana was a David Mamet play. That's a good play, but didn't really work as a film because it's 2 people standing in a room talking, basically. In something like The Breakfast Club, you change locations minorly. I mean, you went from the library to the hallway once, but they're basically in the room. Except all the characters, when you combine 2 different characters, you get a different feeling. Mm-hmm. So if you have multiple characters in the conversation there, I think go back to Larry's rule. If you have like interesting characters and you can draw a bunch of really good scenes, then you can survive in a single location. Unless that's the purpose of it, which is like, I guess Locke, just now Tom Hardy, which is all in the car, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's different. That's an artistic experience about being in one location. But if you're trying to make the other film, like, Breakfast Club or Reservoir Dogs, I think it's about interesting scenes. And if you can build enough of them and make the characters really clear, make behavior, separate them by behavior as much as possible. I can't say that. It was a great lesson to me. Behavior is absolutely everything. Behavior is what separates Fredo from Sonny. Not the lines in the script as much as the behavior that's in the script.
Now, what is that relative to, behavior in terms of just their dialogue and their actions, you mean?
They're always their actions. Dialogue is secondary. You could write the same dialogue for two different characters and then give one behavior and the other, and they'll be two entirely different characters. Right?
Okay.
Behavior is Ed Norton in his briefs in the sunbed is behavior. Mm-hmm. And it tells you more about Mike than anything he could say virtually. He comes in the first scene in that hat, standing by the ghost light. That's behavior. You know who he is before he opens his mouth, right? He's in profile by the ghost light in that hat. Michael in his underwear, like just things that make people uniquely themselves.
Right. Yeah. Did you ever? I assume you've read the Raiders of the Lost Ark screenplay.
Of course I have. It's annoying. It's annoyingly brilliant.
Did you ever talk to him about? I'm a huge Lawrence Kasdan fan.
Please. The first time I met him, I almost fell down. And it's so funny. He's such a jerk because we were doing a table reading of The Bodyguard. So I adapted the film into the musical, which we did in London, and now we're touring and may come to Broadway soon. But so I had adapted his screenplay, and I hadn't met him, but it's Lawrence Kasdan. You know what I mean? It's like, Grand Canyon is one of my favorite movies, let alone anything else.
The Big Chill.
The Big Chill. We can go on.
Amazing.
And he comes into the room with Meg, his wife, who wrote Grand Canyon with him. First time I meet him, I shake his hand. And then we sit at the table reading, all the actors and myself and the director were at the table, and they were in chairs, and he literally sits right behind my back. Like in the room, he's behind me, and I'm like, are you serious? Like, either he's being very gracious as a writer, or he's just plain out trying to intimidate me. It was one of the two. Either he's just sparing me having to watch his every reaction, or he's like, hey buddy, I'm on your shoulders to watch out. It's one of the two, but either way, it's brilliant moves. But yeah, Raiders of the Lost Ark is just, it's epic in every sense of the word. So well written.
Okay, well, let me, you've been really nice and haven't said anything about time. Let me ask you my final question, and then I'll leave you in peace.
Of course,
if you could, the last segment I always called the time machine. So the question is, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself when you were much younger, say your 20-year-old self, what advice would you have for yourself?
Oh, God.
First, you could reassure yourself that you had won an Oscar.
Yeah, and then my 20-year-old
don't
self
worry.
would beat the crap out of my 46-year-old self for lying after I said that. I guess I feel lucky. I grew up with very little. I didn't graduate college, or I grew up not the greatest of circumstances. I think I did one of my advices that I would give my 20-year-old self. I did, so it doesn't work, which was to say, study technique. I can't say it enough. Anybody that thinks that they just can sit down and, write something, you might be able to do it once. You'll never do it. Well, you'll probably never do it twice, and no chance will you do it a third time. So if you're planning a career without knowing a foundation of technique, you're out of your mind. But I sort of did that. But I guess what I would say to my 20-year-old self is, hold on to your voice. Don't try to please people so much. Like, be good to work with and be a good person that people want to work with. But more than anything, I would have told myself, and it took me a long time to learn this, I would have gone back and said, hold on to your own voice because it's original and nobody else is like it. And I think what we do when we're young is we try to write things or direct things, or we try to imitate in art. I think that's the nature of artists. We start by imitating until we find our own voice. But to say that my voice was valuable back then, that I wish I would have known, I would have said no less. You know what I mean? I would have told my pompous 20-year-old self know a lot less than you think you do because you don't know anything. Just learn from everybody. Anybody who wants to talk to you, it doesn't hurt to listen. You can always throw it away. But hold on to your originality. And I think if Birdman says anything, it's that there's still a place. And by the way, Nightcrawler, Whiplash, this sort of crop of movies this year, if they say anything, they say that there's people still want originality for all the cookie cutter business that's going on right now in storytelling. People still want originality, and they will pay attention, and they will pay for it, and they will reward you for it. And some people will hate you, and some people love you. If one more person told me or tweeted, "Am I the only person that hated Birdman?" I'm like, no, you and a billion people hated, like tons of people hated Birdman. Do you know what I mean? But it's that thing of making themselves special by saying, "Am I the only one?" No, idiot. There are thousands of people that hated Birdman. It's fine to hate Birdman. A lot of people love Birdman. I tweeted myself. I was like, it's a film. It's not pizza. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're allowed to not like it. It's fine. It's your opinion and it's perfectly valid. But originality will stand out, and they'll fight about your movie like Birdman in a good way, or you'll fail. But it's hard to completely fail if you're being original. And the only way to be original is to hold on to your own voice, that only you could write it. Only Larry Kasdan can write a script like Larry Kasdan. And when you read one of the scripts, you're like, right, it's Larry Kasdan. Just like Bill Goldman or Jonathan Logan or Aaron Sorkin. You read it and you're like, well, I know who that is. So I would tell my 20-year-old self to, one, know a lot less, stop knowing everything, and two, hold on to the original voice at whatever cost.
Alex, it has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
It was totally my pleasure. Thank you so much. And hopefully our paths will cross down the road.
I hope you enjoyed going inside the mind of Alex Dinelaris. If you want links to anything we spoke about in this episode, head over to the show notes at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/ISM002. And if you like the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Spreaker, wherever you listen to the show. Head over to screenwritersmind.com. Thank you for listening. And as always, write, rewrite, sell, repeat. I'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Inside the Screenwriter's Mind with Alex Ferrari at screenwritersmind.com. And for more great filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.